What's up, guys? Hope you had a good Shabbat, good week or so since I sent my last recording. Hope you're all safe and healthy, and your families are healthy. Without Shem, I'll have better days soon. With that, as depressing introduction, we are starting the third and final class on the Holy Man of Faith. As I mentioned last time, we skipped a relatively large section on the community of Adam to the covenantal community because the large section mostly deals with that community as what Rav Soloveitchik calls the community of prayer. And so we're going to come back to it when we do two classes, maybe one class, I think two classes, where we do a bunch of it on, we talk about tefillah in Rav Soloveitchik's thought. We're going to talk about today is the end of Lonely Man of Faith, where Rav Soloveitchik tries to sort of resolve or talk about the possible resolutions of the tension between Adam 1 and Adam 2 within the individual and then also within the community and how the two interact. I think in some ways this is my favorite section of the book, and it's probably in every way my favorite section of the book. And one of the reasons for that is I think it speaks very strongly to a critique of what I would call maybe New Age religion, but certainly a certain version of Talmud Mitzvot. That it's very easy to do religion in a way that I think is very problematic, a way that makes religion more about the self, about just another tool for making the world, like giving yourself a better life, and not anything that really demands anything of you. And I think Rav Soloveitchik is often thought of as someone who emphasizes the Akedah and sacrifice. And I think it's not necessarily true. I think this whole book is about how here I think both trends are important. But one thing we're talking about today, the one we're going to start with in some sense, no, we're going to start with, we're going to do with it starting in source 4 or so, is the potential for that sort of thinking, for what we might call Adam 1 thinking, to really subvert religion and subvert the depth of faith and what it really means to believe in anything outside yourself. So with that introduction, we're going to start with source number 1. The element of the tragic is not fully eliminated from the destiny of the man of faith, even after joining the covenantal community. We said at the very beginning of this essay that the loneliness of the man of faith is an integral part of his destiny from which he can never be completely liberated. The dialectical awareness, the steady oscillating between the majestic natural community and the covenantal faith community, renders the act of complete redemption unrealizable. The man of faith, in his continuous movement between the pole of natural majesty and that of covenantal humility, is prevented from totally immersing in the immediate covenantal awareness of the redeeming presence, knowability, and involvement of God in the community of man. From time to time, the man of faith is thrown into the majestic community, where the colloquy, which is the sort of group discussion, as well as the covenantal consciousness, are swept away. He suddenly finds himself revolving around the cosmic center, now and then catching a glimpse of the Creator who hides behind the boundless drama of creation that is shifting from a Adam 2 perspective and Adam 1 perspective, from community to examining the universe. To be sure, this alternation of cosmic and covenantal involvement is not one of light and shade, enhanced activity and fatigue, as the mystics are accustomed to calling their alternating experiences, but represent two kinds of creative and spontaneous activity, both willed and sanctioned by God. Let us not forget that the majestic community is willed by God as much as the covenantal faith community. Here, Rav Soloveitchik returns to something we mentioned 2 classes ago already, which is that the problem of the modern man of faith is multifold. One is that the modern world is so deeply contrary to what it means to have faith. But another thing is that really, if you're going to be a modern Orthodox Jew, a modern person of faith, it means living in 2 worlds. And that means being torn, and that tornness is itself going to make you seem strange. In a sense, it's the eternal quandary, eternal sort of conundrum that I'm reading too much Rav Soloveitchik. I keep having trouble using words with less than 3 syllables. But it's the eternal problem of modern Orthodox Jews that we are looked at as weird at the very least, if not like actively problematic, with people on both the right and the left by people who claim to be more religious and people who claim to be less religious, claim to be less religious, people who claim to be more modern than us. We are seen as both insufficiently religious and insufficiently modern. And could be a very deeply alienating experience. But that's what it means to try and hold on to two different things, to recognize the importance of these two different ways of being in the world that we've been talking about. So with that, I want to jump into source number 2. I'm just going to talk a little bit more about how these two communities come together, or perhaps why. If one would inquire of me about the teleology of halacha, and teleology just means the direction, the goal of halacha, I would tell him that it manifests itself exactly in the paradoxical yet magnificent dialectic, the back and forth, which underlies the halachic gesture. When man gives himself to the covenantal community, the halacha reminds him that he is also wanted and needed in another community. The cosmic majestic, and when it comes across man while he is involved in the creative enterprise in the justice community, it does not let him forget that he is a covenantal being who will never find self-fulfillment outside of the covenant, and that God awaits his return to the covenantal community. So the first thing he says as far as halacha is something that speaks to us in both modes, both when we're part of a community of people trying to achieve things, part of the modern world, based on success and the ability to make things work for you. And on the flip side, when we're part of the covenantal community, part of faith, which is about opening yourself up to things, being vulnerable, being part of religion, halacha speaks to both of those realms, and always reminds us about the other one. We're going to see an example of this when we get to the end of the book. It's the very end of the book, with the end of this source sheet. We're going to talk about the prophet Elisha, who Rav Soloveitchik thinks sort of emblematic of this sort of movement. But the point is that halacha never lets you rest in one or the other. Halacha really does want you to be involved in the modern world in taking care of people. He is a long footnote we didn't look at about the idea that halacha as a whole goes back to the Mechilta on Parshat Mishpatim, about halacha, the Torah has given us permission to heal. That in some sense, in a religious system that believes in God and God's control, it doesn't make any sense to say, okay, well, humans are going to heal people who've been injured. You might say God injured them. God healed them if he wanted to. He clearly wants them to be ill. There's even a troubling line in the Gemara to figure out. There's a lot of different ways to deal with it, interpret it, but its own sort of stark intensity. It's troubling. It's tov sheberofim legehenom. The best of the doctors goes to hell. My own interpretation is that it's. I don't remember where I heard this the first time, but my preferred interpretation is that it's because the best doctors used to be not really any better than anyone else and tended to kill people because they were working with sick people, and sometimes sick people die, but also because they gave people things they thought were medicine that killed them. Yeah, that's off topic. Halacha wants us to be involved in building society and building hospitals and ventilators and all of those wonderful things that are part of the modern world. But simultaneously, when we're in the modern world, halacha reminds us that there's much more going on as well. We have to be involved in prayer, tefillah, and Talmud Torah, and it pulls us back and forth. I would also add, back in the source number 2, I would also add in reply to such a question that many a time I have the distinct impression that the halacha considered the steady oscillating of the man of faith between majesty and covenant not as a dialectical, but rather as a complementary movement. Right now, there's a tension between these two things, but as two things that go together. The majestic gesture of the man of faith, I am inclined to think, is looked upon by halacha not as contradictory to the covenantal encounter, rather as the reflex action which is caused by this encounter, when man feels the gentle touch of God's hand upon his shoulder and the covenantal invitation to join God is extended to him. Right, the closest to God doesn't have to make us feel like we should withdraw from the modern world. It should make us feel we're standing side by side with God, who created the world and challenged us to be the creator, and we are created in his image. That being close to God should remind us of the ways in which we are partners with God. I am prompted to draw this remarkable inference from the fact that the halacha has a monistic approach to reality, mon from mono, one. It also sees all of reality as one thing. It is not separating into different realms, holy and non-holy. This monistic approach to reality has unreservedly rejected any kind of dualism. The halacha believes that there is only one world, not divisible into secular and hallowed sectors. The halacha doesn't think there's anything that doesn't fall under the realm of halacha. This is an ancient debate if there's such a thing as devar shebereshut, something that's permissible but neither permitted or forbidden. But minimally, you could even say even that has been categorized by halacha as devar shebereshut. Halacha has a category for everything. It can tell you what is permitted, what's forbidden, and what is commanded, and those are all halacha categories. So we moved here from the tension between the two, which sort of always marks the modern Orthodox Jew and the modern man, the lonely man of faith in the modern world, to, okay, these things are in tension, but they also work together. That what it means to serve God, to be religious, is nice to be both these things, modern and religious, Adam the first and Adam the second. Someone who's interested in achieving and building and creating and knowing, and someone who's interested in being known, in accepting and being vulnerable and open to someone else, in recognizing the importance and naturalness and necessity of failure. Both of those are part of something God wants us to be doing at almost all times. And that's something the halacha believes in both of those. And I'll reiterate that as much as Lonely Man of Faith in many ways emphasizes Adam the second, it does talk about both, and all the more so our whole discussions of Mukach Misham, but particularly Halachat Man, really emphasizes the way the Halacha and Torah gives you such an incredible ability to accomplish things in the world and within the realm of Torah. There's an emphasis on Chidush and making Chidushim. That's a pure Adam 1 thing to do, to make Chidushei Torah, have a Chiddush. Source number 3. Since the dialectical role has been assigned to man by God, it is God who wants the man of faith to oscillate, to go back and forth between the faith community and the community of majesty, between being confronted by God in the cosmos and the intimate, immediate apprehension of God through the covenant, and who therefore willed the complete human redemption be unattainable. This redemption, as we talked about last time, is experienced within the community of Adam the second, within the covenantal community, where you are truly known by someone, by another person, by God, in your most vulnerable and most intimately, uniquely you form. And this is the one time you really open up to someone else, and that's a sort of redemption for Rav Soloveitchik. That's impossible because, as we had just said, the halacha pulls us back and forth between the two communities. Had God placed Adam in the majestic community only, then Adam would, as it was stated before, never be aware of existential loneliness. In the majestic community, there is no existential loneliness because we're not unique. We're all people, all intellects, all builders, all people sharing the same project of working on building the world. The sole problem would then be that of aloneness, one that majestic Adam could resolve, right? Aloneness meaning that I don't have enough people with me to get the job done. But it's not that difficult to put together a assembly line, to put together a team to get something done. Had God, vice versa, thrust Adam into the covenantal community exclusively, then he would be beset by the passional experience of his existential loneliness, and also provided with the means of finding redemption from this experience through his covenantal relation to God and his fellow man. Right? If we didn't have a desire to build and achieve and be successful, to attain dignity, then we'd be able to spend all our time in a community that's about openness and vulnerability and not success. To borrow from a very, very different thinker, Rabbi Nachman of Breslov has this famous story about the Master of Prayer in the English translation. And the Master of Prayer is someone who kidnaps, or kidnaps not the right word, but somehow pulls people away from their communities to come daven with him in the forest, and just waste all their time in the forest writing Tehillim and singing Tehillim and davening. And the communities he takes people from all have very specific natures, and the famous one, Medinat Mamon, the country or city of money, where everything is based on how much money you have, and that how much money you have determines your society. Rabbi Nachman of Breslov likes to joke that Rabbi Nachman, or Menachem Froman of Tekoa, died in 2013, he liked to joke that Rabbi Nachman discovered America. Because you can tell because he wrote about it in Masim Tefillah, the Medinat Mamon, the country of money. The country of money, how much money you have determines your status in your class to such a significant degree that people who have the most money are kings, and somehow even more than that can become gods. And so Rabbi Nachman contrasts that with the city or state country where it's all about attaining money versus the wasting time in davening mode. And that's sort of the same contrast that Rav Soloveitchik is setting up here, except that once again Rav Soloveitchik is actually giving much more positive to the non-tefillah side, which is not identifying with sort of barbaric capitalism or idolatrous capitalism, better. He's identifying it with science and medicine and technology, civilization. But both of them agree. On the other side, there's this potential for a community of tefillah, an intentional community of people who care deeply for themselves, for each other, for God, and for the interrelation of themselves, each other, and God. That would be enable true existential redemption. Back in source number 3, however, God in his inscrutable wisdom has decreed differently. Man discovers his loneliness in the covenantal community, and before he's given a chance to climb up to the high level of a complete covenantal real existence, dedicated in faith to God and in sympathy to man, a man of faith is pushed into a new community where he's told to lead an expanded service existence, rather than a covenantal, concentrated, in-depth existence. Because of this onward movement from the center to center, man does not feel at home in any community. He's commanded to move on before he manages to strike roots in either of these communities, and so the ontological loneliness of a man of faith persists. Going back to the beginning of last class, talking about the Adam 1 and Adam 2 comes from this the two different production of Bereshit. God made us this way. God that Rav Soloveitchik says the reason that Sefer Bereshit has two contradictory first chapters, it starts twice in some sense, is because there are two truths about man that are contradictory but equally true. And this is where that really comes out, is that God has created us to be forever lonely and forever on the move. And that as much as we're looking for a chance to resolve the tension between these two different ways of being in the world, it's never necessarily really possible. Once again, there's going to be maybe a better resolution that comes around with Alicia at the end of this. But so far, I'm saying in general, we're just forced to go back and forth all the time. Okay, source number 4. I'm going to move into the second half of this, where also it's going to be a little more critical about Adam the First. But he's critical of Adam the First, not instead of being critical of the modern world as we think of it. What he's going to do here, I think, is very important. That's something I tried to emphasize a little bit last class and the first class on this topic. But he's saying Adam 1, Adam 2 is not identical with what we think of as modernity and religion, or the secular world and religion. That because they're ways of orienting yourself toward the world and toward things you encounter in the world, people, objects, in terms of openness and vulnerability on the one hand versus intelligent knowing and dominance and success on the other hand. You can do both of those within, we're going to talk about here, you can do both of those within the realm of what we might consider religion. And it's equally true, you could do both of those within the secular world as well. So here's going to talk a lot about he's going to sort of criticize the relationship of Adam 1 and religion, and what an Adam the First religion really looks like. It's something very dangerous, according to Rav Soloveitchik. Source number 4, contemporary Adam the First, extremely successful in his cosmic majestic enterprise, refuses to pay earnest heed to the duality in man, and tries to deny the undeniable, that another Adam exists beside or rather in him. By rejecting Adam the Second, contemporary man, eo ipso, which means by definition or automatically, dismisses the covenantal faith community as something superfluous and obsolete. To clear up any misunderstanding on the part of my audience, I wish to note that I am not concerned with this essay with the vulgar and illiterate atheism professed and propagated in the most ugly fashion by the natural political community, which denies the unique transcendental worth of the human personality. Right? He's not upset about Adam the First in the form of the new atheists or the people who totally reject religion. referring rather to Western man who is affiliated with organized religion and is a generous supporter of its institutions. He stands today in danger of losing his dialectical awareness and abandoning completely the metaphysical polarity implanted in man as a member of both majestic and covenantal communities. So if you remember from last class, the ultimate betrayal of Adam, Adam the first betraying Adam the second, when Adam the first becomes the most demonic, is Rav Soloveitchik says in the 20th century when Adam the first tries to deny entirely the existence of Adam the second. This is not a part of human existence, that there is no duality in man. And when that really happens isn't just the denial of religion in general, it's when even religion is included within success. When we think about religion as a tool for helping us, then we forget about that religion is really about getting beyond ourselves, about something outside ourselves. Then it becomes sort of the total subversion of Adam 2. You've taken what used to be sort of the garments of Adam 2 in this world, the tefillah and Talmud Torah, and said, I can give good reasons for doing these things even if I don't believe in anything outside myself. These are good things for me. I can spent a gap year in Israel on my resume. Is an excellent Adam 1 subversion of Adam 2. You're taking what could be about learning about your tradition, learning about yourself, learning about trying to create a relationship with God, and making it into something to show people how cool you are, and something to help you get ahead in life. Source number 5, the prime purpose of the religious community, and the religious community meaning the community of Adam the first, but within religion, as opposed to the faith community, is the successful furtherance of the interests, not the deepening enhancements of the commitments, of man who values religion in terms of its usefulness to him, and considers the religious act a medium through which he may increase his happiness. This assumption on the part of majestic man about the role of religion is not completely wrong, if only, as I shall explain, he would recognize also the non-pragmatic aspects of religion. So, as Rav Soloveitchik has said throughout, Adam the first is never totally pasul. He is okay here. It's not bad that there are majestic Adam the first aspects of religion, but it's only a problem if they totally deny the non-pragmatic aspects of religion. Faith is indeed relevant to man not only metaphysically but also practically. It gives his life, even at the secular mundane level, a new existential dimension, a new personal depth. Certain aspects of doctrinal and normative covenantal charisma of faith, doctrinal meaning ideas, normative meaning like binding, law, whatever, charisma being a word that also loves, which means the message of faith, are of utmost importance to majestic man and are, in a paradoxical way, translatable into the latter's vernacular. And this metaphor of translation is important for Rav Soloveitchik in this section. There's some aspects of faith that can be translated, of Adam 2 experience that can be translated to Adam the first, and certain things that can't. And it's an excellent metaphor because it's a constant debate to what degree you can translate totally between one language and another. Are there perhaps things in one language that can't ever be really translated into another? Certainly not well, certainly not all the way. There might be some things that are just stuck in one religion or in one language, or they're outside of some languages that can't ever be rendered in the other language. And without getting into the broader debate about Stam translation, Rav Soloveitchik uses the word translation to talk about going back, how we go back and forth across the line between Adam the first and the second, between success and vulnerability, and if there's the way certain things like what we classically call religion can be translated from the Adam the second side to Adam the first side, they say yes, but not all the way. There's only a partial translation, and in fact, we'll see in a second, it's critical that there is something that cannot be translated. In order for one language to remain unique and important, it cannot be rendered entirely into another language. Otherwise, we just do away with it. So back in source number 5, it is very certain and self-evident that Adam the first cannot succeed completely in his efforts to attain majesty and dignity without having the man of faith contribute his share. The cultural edifice whose great architect Adam the first is would be built on shifting sands if he sought to conceal from himself and from others the fact that he alone cannot implement the mandate of majestic dignity entrusted to him by God, that he must petition Adam the second for help. And it's somehow the world Adam the first is building actually requires Adam the second. To be sure, man can build spaceships capable of reaching other planets without addressing himself to the mystery of faith, without being awakened to an enhanced, inspired life which reflects the covenantal truth. He can certainly triumph to a limited degree over the elemental forces of nature without crossing the frontiers of here and now sense facticity. Right? All the achievements of science don't actually require faith. The Tower of Babel can be built high and mighty without beholding and acknowledging the great verity, the great truth. The heaven is yet higher. However, here's where he needs Adam II. The idea of majesty, which Adam I is striving to realize, embraces much more than mere building of machines, no matter how complex and efficacious. Actually, not sure how to pronounce that word. A successful man wants to be sovereign, not only in the physical, but also in the spiritual world. That because we are deeply spiritual beings, the same way that halacha includes both the religious realm and the secular realm, so too Adam I, the desire to be successful and sovereign and dominant, all implies in both the physical and the spiritual world. He is questing not only for material success, but for ideological and axiological achievements as well. Ideological in terms of beliefs, axiological in terms of his values. He's concerned with philosophy of nature and of man, of matter and mind, of things and ideas, right? So the idea that there's more going on than just technology, which is how Rav Soloveitchik started off by describing Adam I, as Adam I is the technologist who studies the world and asks, how does it work and can I replicate that? How can I replicate it in such a manner as it helps me, make myself better, helps me succeed more, helps me get ahead? But he is also concerned with, in a sense, dominance within the abstract realms of values and ideology, which essentially means attaining truth. But that requires believing there's more out there than just technology. And so in that sense, he requires Adam II as well. And this is an idea that he sort of goes on at length in very technical terms. We're going to see a little bit in the next source. But mostly I recommend looking at that inside on your own. Source number 6, since majestic man is in need of a transcendental experience in order to strengthen his cultural edifice, it is the duty of man to provide a faith to provide him with the component parts of this experience. That the way we construct culture, art, literature, etc., requires believing in more than just raw technology. It doesn't necessarily require believing in the God of Abraham, as it were, but it requires belief in some sort of transcendence. And so that can only come from Adam II, who's open to there being something that really transcends man. Adam I is too closed off. He's always concerned with his own understanding and applying his own understanding on everything he encounters. He can never really experience something that truly transcends himself. So the transcendental experience of art and literature has to come from Adam II. God would not have implanted the necessity in majestic man for such spiritual perceptions and ideas if he had not at the same time endowed the man of faith with the skill of converting some of his apocalyptic experiences, which are metalogical and non-hedonic. And apocalyptic is a word we typically associate with the end of the world, apocalypse, but it actually comes from a Greek word meaning the revelation of things that were hidden. So in this case, it means converting some of his apocalyptic experience, converting some of his revelation experiences, the experiencing of discovering something transcendent, which are metalogical and non-hedonic, meaning they're transcend logic, which we'll get to more in the next source, and non-hedonic, meaning they don't simply give pleasure to the body, into a system of values and verities, truths, comprehensible to majestic man, the experimenter, the aesthete, which aesthete means someone who loves beauty and pleasure, and above all, the creative mind. So this I think is a very interesting point, which is that this whole issue of translation we were just talking about, we have to be able to translate and can translate religion into the language of success and languages of modern society. He's here saying that you can tell that you're supposed to be able to do that. You're supposed to be able to understand the modern value of, or sort of secular value of religion from the fact that it's possible that we can do that. That God gave us the ability to explain, convert, translate revelation into modern categories. I don't hear a second to note that this is fundamentally the endeavor of Torah Tamei HaMitzvot. Tamei HaMitzvot are about recognizing the ways in which these mitzvot, these rituals that we have, these actions that we're supposed to do, these commandments we're supposed to follow, the way that if you really think about them, you can find great value in them. And that value comes from the problems they solve or the ways they help you. They're not specifically from their revelational source. They come from the ways in which they can actually be explained without use of revelation. The best example of this is the Rambam's attempt in Moreh Nevuchim to give Tamei Mitzvot. Rambam is very clear. Where Tamei Mitzvot come from, the realm of the reasons, the explanations for mitzvot are trying to do two things: fix the mind and fix the body. And the body, he includes the individual and the community and society. And body includes not just make you healthier. That's not some of the mitzvot are for that, but also in terms of your ethics and your values and stop people from fighting. Right, so there's society and the individual have all of these problems, whether they're conflicts, whether it's health, whether it's knowing the right truths, like discovering truth, and the mitzvot come to solve the problems of the body and the mind, the individual and society. That you can actually translate all of the mitzvot from the language of the Torah and the Revelation into the language of society and individual and body and mind, and that will help you explain all of the mitzvot. You can sort of totally translate it. And Rav Soloveitchik in Halachic Mind, which we did in classes, I think 3 and 4 of this year, he's very critical of the Rambam for exactly this point, making the same point he's basically making now in a slightly different way in the Limit of Faith, that Rambam in some sense creates an almost atheistic model of Tamei Mitzvot, that you can explain all the mitzvot without reference to God, just by reference to community and society and individual and midot and it's all values and truth. So what Rav Soloveitchik is going to echo here is that Tamei Mitzvot, if we can totally translate the mitzvot from Adam the second into Adam the first, then you really lose out on that openness to God and the God aspect of this, and you lose out on faith, which is what we're going to talk about now, what faith is. At this point, however, the crisis in the relations between man of faith and majestic man begins to develop. So he's going to talk about where they're incompatible, right? We just talked about how you really can put them together, and we have a God-given ability to translate from faith into majesty, and here's where they don't work. If the job of translating faith mysteries into cultural aspects could be fully accomplished, then contemporary man of faith could free himself, if not from the ontological awareness which is perennial, which is constant, then at least from the peculiar feeling of psychological loneliness and anguish, which is due to his historical confrontation with the man of culture, right? We started this source sheet in the whole book with there's a tension that you can never get away from. But if you could do a total translation, you could get away from the tension. The man of faith would, if this illusion came true, be at peace with the man of culture, so that the latter would fully understand the significance of human dialectics, and a perfect harmonious relationship would prevail between both atoms. If you could totally translate between them, there'd be no confusion, no difference, no disagreements. In some sense, one would just be reduced to the other one. However, this harmony can never be attained, since the man of faith is not the compromising type, and his covenantal commitment eludes cognitive analysis by the logos, by the mind, and hence does not lend itself completely to the act of cultural translation. Now, I'll stop here for a second to note that Adam the first, one of the first things that Rav Soloveitchik said about him, he echoed Rambam's understanding of the image of God. Adam the first is created in the image of God, which Rambam says is the mind. But for Rambam, that's about trying to understand sort of philosophical truth, and for Rav Soloveitchik, it's the mind that is technologically oriented and trying to succeed and figure out how to use things for his own advantage. But the idea that he's echoing here is that the Adam second can't be translated and always eludes cognitive analysis by the mind, which is the fundamental category of Adam the first. And this does not lend itself completely to the act of cultural translation. There are simply no cognitive categories in which the total commitment of the man of faith could be spelled out. This commitment is rooted not in one dimension, it's the rational one, but in the whole personality of the man of faith. Faith is not something that's just an aspect of your mind, it's part of the entirety of your being. The whole of the human being, the rational as well as the non-rational aspects, is committed to God. Hence, the magnitude of the commitment is beyond the comprehension of the logos and the ethos. The act of faith is aboriginal, exploding with elemental force as an all-consuming and all-pervading eudaimonic passional experience, in which our most secret urges, aspirations, fears, and passions, at times even unsuspected by us, manifest themselves. There's a lot in this sentence. I want to go back. The act of faith is aboriginal, meaning it has nothing that comes before it. It is a starting point. It explodes with elemental force as an all-consuming, all-pervading, eudaimonic, passional experience. It's something that overtakes us from within us, from the very depths of who we are. Eudaimonic passional meaning everything to do with emotions and it happens to us, but eudaimonic meaning search for the good life and some happiness is a sense of this is the right way to live that comes from the depths of who we are, in which our most secret urges, aspirations, fears, and passions, and times unsuspected by us even, manifest themselves. When the faith is something that includes all of those urges, aspirations, fears, and passions, and they all well up from within us, not because we think they should, but because that's just part of who we are. The commitment of the man of faith is thrown into the mold of the in-depth personality and is immediately accepted before the mind is given a chance to investigate the reasonableness of this unqualified commitment. Faith doesn't give us a chance to like second guess itself, argue, trying to prove it, should we believe or not. We just believe. The intellect does not chart the course of the man of faith. Its role is an a posteriori one. It attempts ex post facto to retrace the footsteps of the man of faith. And even in this modest attempt, the intellect is not completely successful. Of course, as long as the path of the man of faith cuts across the territory of the reasonable, the intellect may follow him and identify his footsteps. Right? There is an intersection between faith and intellect. That's how many mitzvot. I mean, we're talking about the area where there can be translation from faith into intellect into reason. The very instant, however, the man of faith transcends the frontiers of the reasonable and enters into the realm of the unreasonable, the intellect is left behind and must terminate its search for understanding. The logic of the search for understanding. The man of faith, animated by his great experience, is able to reach the point at which not only his logic of the mind, but even his logic of the heart and of the will, everything, even his own I awareness, has to give into an absurd commitment. The man of faith is insanely committed to and madly in love with God. Faith is not about reason. This is not necessarily require denying reason. If you was denying reason, there would be no Adam the first. But the two are fundamentally different, and that's why, to the degree, why all faith can be translated into the terms of reason in many ways. There's lots of aspects of faith that make sense. There's always some aspect of it that's unreasonable, that's absurd, that's a leap of faith. To return to a metaphor Rav Soloveitchik used, and I sure use in this class at some point, anytime it comes to the question of love and what does it mean to love someone, you can run into a lot of the same discussion about what it means to believe. That love, and I would say two ways. One, you love someone for all kinds of reasons. You love them for all of these different things about them you could describe, their hobbies, their habits, their things they say, their opinions, their very deeply their values and their goals in life and the broad trajectory they want their life to take. All of it has to be appealing to you. But also, if you only love those things about them and you don't love them as the human being in the specific physical space of their body that is just them without any more details about them, then you don't really love them, because you could take all that information you've written down about them, as it were, their shidduch resume, and just make that about somebody else. And if what you love is the resume, you'll love the other person just as much. If you love things that can be written down on a piece of paper about someone, everything from how much Torah they studied on their gap year to the color of their eyes, all the things you could write down, then you love those things and not them. That faith, like love, is about commitment beyond reasonable and comprehensible aspects, about loving essence, like committing to essence. That word commitment is very important for the second aspect in which they're similar, which is because there's always something beyond the comprehensible and the reasonable. Logic can never get you to commitment. Logic can get you in the direction of commitment, and if you don't have any of the comprehensible aspects, if you don't like anything about a person, there is no reason to commit to them. Lots of good reasons not to commit to them. It will not be a good idea. If you do not appreciate faith, if you can't find any value in religion in your life, it doesn't help you at all, then you shouldn't commit to it. It's like a crazy thing for me to say because I'm teaching about religion, but I don't think you could be in that situation. But if that's where you're at, then you are not going to really be able to commit. Um, but once you have those things, once you have the reason it is reasonable, which you love it, which makes sense, you have to be able to take a leap beyond that and say, okay, so I know that this all makes sense, but that can actually push you to make the jump. And we want to, commit someone for the rest of your life, ask someone to marry you. You're committing to an unknown future. And you're committing something that's always going to be bigger than the moment of that decision you make. So you can't ever justify it. You can do is you get justified enough, and then you make the leap. And the same thing is true of faith. Faith always has some aspect of this is justified enough, and I can take the leap. And it's my commitment that really creates and really is what that faith is. We're going to read it, but next I have a little piece from Rav Shagar from Faith, Shattered, and Restored, where he echoes a lot of what Rav Soloveitchik just said. One thing I want to note, both of them hit on, I'll go back into Rav Soloveitchik, is the intellect does not chart the course of the man of faith. Its role is an a posteriori one. It attempts ex post facto to retrace the footsteps of the man of faith. And even in this modest attempt, the intellect is not completely successful. Faith and intellect, because of the way the relationship works, we've been talking about, the intellect can only ever explain faith afterwards. Faith is fundamentally subjective. We talked about this in some of our classes. For Rav Soloveitchik, the experience of faith is fundamentally subjective. And what's important for him is that it doesn't ever stay there. The intellect can justify and explain it. But he's saying, as we've seen here, not entirely. There's some aspect of it that always remains subjective. And the importance is to keep those two together, to explain it and as much as possible, but never to do so entirely. So in source number 8, the untranslatability of the complete faith experience is due not to the weakness, but to the greatness of the latter. If an all-embracing translation of the great mystery of revelation and its kerygma were possible, and kerygma again means message, then the uniqueness of the faith experience and its commitments would be lost. Only peripheral elements of the act of faith can be projected on a cognitive, pragmatic background. Prayer, for instance, might appeal to majestic man as the most uplifting, integrating, and purifying act, or rather than the finest and noblest emotions. Yet these characteristics, however essential to Adam the first, are of marginal interest to Adam the second, who experiences prayer as the awesome confrontation of God and man, as the great paradox of man conversing with God as an equal fellow member of the covenantal society, at the same time being aware that he fully belongs to God and that God demands complete surrender and self-sacrifice. Right, this is a good example of the critique of Tommy Mitzvot involved in this discussion, that prayer is so easy to put it in terms of like the value of tefillah for the dignified personality, in terms of meditation, in terms of what it inspires within you. But people who are davening don't care about that, according to Rav Soloveitchik. That on some level, if you're concerned with what tefillah does for you, you're forgetting the fact that it's supposed to be a conversation with two partners. And the same thing's true in a normal conversation with another human being. If you're talking with someone and all you care about is what that conversation does for you, you're not having a real conversation. And you've forgotten that, as Soloveitchik says, opening up to the other really requires total surrender and self-sacrifice, in order to make it not about you, to make it about them. In a word, the message of translated religion is not the only one which the man of faith must address to majestic men of culture. Besides this message, the man of faith must bring to the attention of man's culture the kerygma of original faith in all its singularity and pristine purity, in spite of the incompatibility of this message with the fundamental credo of utilitarian society. How staggering this incompatibility is! This unique message speaks of defeat instead of success, of accepting a higher will instead of commanding, of giving instead of conquering, of retreating instead of advancing, of acting irrationally instead of always being reasonable. Here the tragic event occurs. Contemporary majestic man rejects his dialectical assignment, and with it the man of faith. On some level, Rav Soloveitchik almost ends the book, and he's going to have a final chapter on Elisha, which represents, as Reuven Siegler points out in his book, Majesty and Humility, on Rav Soloveitchik, there's sort of two conclusions, and this is the first one we're seeing here, that Adam II, man of faith, brings a message to the world that's very important, it's critical, and that ultimately Adam I rejects. The two don't ever go together, and Adam I is demonic, and modern society is demonic, and man of faith is condemned to loneliness, and on some level, certainly on societal level, the dialectic doesn't work. You can't hold the two together in any way. Before we move on to the other possibility he sees, which is in the second conclusion in the story of Elisha the prophet, I want to note that the message of the man of faith has to bring is in some sense mostly about the negation of Adam the first. We have to recognize that there are places where Adam the first is is not the right model of living. It's not the right way to be in the world. It's not the right way to interact with other people. It's not the right way to think about ourselves and our actions. As important as it is, it's so critical to remember the value of faith, of he's irrational, I would say something like irrational, of the things that transcend reason, of the things that of recognizing the importance of defeat, of being vulnerable, of giving. Um, it's just something that I think is so lost in our world in many ways. Um, Certainly in the way we talk about religion, we talk about the mitzvot as tools for making, getting in touch with yourself, tools for making a better world, and that's not wrong. But if that's all they are, then you've just reduced religion, you've reduced God in some sense to a tool for your own, for furthering your own aims, for things that make sense to you, and you're not willing to be part of someone else's story and part of something bigger than yourself. You made yourself the most important thing, your sense of what's valuable, the most important thing. And that sort of subversion of faith is very, very troubling. The flip side to note, as I mentioned before, is that you can also have Adam too, giving, accepting something higher will, in we typically think of secular endeavors, like building society is something you can do from the place of retreating instead of advancing. A couple times I've given examples from voting. I think voting is a good way, to talk about here. It's possible to vote for policies that actually hurt yourself. If you think that they're better for other people and better for society as a whole and better for the most number of people, however you want to decide what's more valuable, that very often people think of voting in democracy as being about getting the best thing for you and voting for what's going to help you, and everyone votes for what helps them, and that sort of works out. But you could vote for things that are going to help the largest number of people, help people who truly need it, or anything like that. That would be a deeply Adam the second way to participate in society. And so I want to end here with something more on that note, which is the story of Elisha. Elisha is a phenomenal story. I'm going to quickly summary. Rav Soloveitchik sort of summarizes it well enough to go through that. But Elisha was the student of Eliyahu Navi, and then took over for him. Elisha was a typical representative of the majestic community. He was the son of a prosperous farmer, a man of property whose interests were centered around disworldly material goods such as crops, livestock, and market prices. His objective was economic success, his aspiration material wealth. The Bible portrays him as efficient, capable, and practical, mindful of a modern business executive. Right. So Eliyahu first sees him with 12 oxen or whatever that he's running. He sort of yoked 12 oxen together. I think it's like a big agricultural enterprise for those days, essentially. And then Eliyahu has to throw his aderet over him, which can mean mantle, or the whole thing, what exactly that means. Suddenly, the mantle of Eliyahu was cast upon him. While he was engaged in the most ordinary, everyday activity in tilling the soil, he encountered God and felt the transforming touch of God's hand. And so it's sort of Eliyahu's cloak, but also his his prophetic nature is cast over Elisha. The strangest metamorphosis occurred. It changes. Within seconds, the old Elisha disappeared and a new Elisha emerged. Majestic man was replaced by covenantal man. And then, so it sort of goes on to explore this. He returns at the very end. This is the last paragraph of the book. However, Elisha's withdrawal from majesty was not final. He followed the dialectical course of all our prophets. Later, when he achieved the pinnacle of faith and arrived at the outer boundaries of human commitment, he came back to society as a participant in state affairs, an advisor of kings, and a teacher of the majestic community. God ordered him to return to the people, to offer them a share in the covenantal drama, and to involve them in the great and solemn colloquy. He was God's messenger, carrying, like Moshe, 2 tablets of stone containing the covenantal kerygma, covenantal message. That is, I think, very important. People who suddenly found themselves outside yeshiva, back in the States, getting ready for some form of of college experience, some form of being in a community instead of being totally involved in learning Torah. The what it means to be sort of where we can put back together the two Adam, the first and Adam the second, without feeling them, totally intentionally torn apart, is that Adam the second really think deeply about what faith has to say, what vulnerability, what giving, what has to say to successful secular culture, and come back as a prophet and a teacher, and someone who brings the message of sometimes we're not supposed to be worried about ourselves, sometimes we're supposed to be worried about others, and opening ourselves up to other people, and building community based on true recognition of other people, not just based on what you can get out of other people, based on making space for other people in their deeply, often weird uniqueness. So there's the people who don't fit our typical uh, understandings of, what, like, not even what cool is like, of what socially acceptable is like, that we tend to exclude. And those are people who are like unique and looking for someone to accept their uniqueness. Those are the sort of messages we need to bring back to people about the value of including people, no matter how deeply discomforting we find them. That if they don't fit our definition of normal, doesn't mean they're not part of society. We need to bring messages of, trying to be part of something larger than ourselves and not simply working for the resume or just working for sort of personal success. So that is Adam. That is Loving Man of Faith, and I hope you all enjoyed. I look forward to sending you more of these for after Pesach. Sorry, I'm not leaving you with any sort of Pesach Torah now, other than recommend you think about the relationship between redemption in terms of how Rav Soloveitchik sees it, about opening up to other people and being opened up to by other people, in terms of accepting each of us in us, accepting them, and accepting us in our own uniqueness, and what that has to do with the wicked son who would not have been redeemed, because he said, "What is what do these this service mean to you? Explain to me in my terms what you think about these mitzvot, and that's why he can't ever be redeemed." So I leave you that to think about. Chag Sameach.